There are many criminal factions in the Elder Scrolls universe, however many of them will forever remain a mystery unless Bethesda decides to build further upon their lore. Groups like the Somerset Shadows and the Silver Crescent were cool to hear of, but we don't know anything about them. There have also been plenty of cool factions like the Blackbow Bandits, the Blackwater Brigands, and the Black Blood Marauders, which we don't know an awful lot about. As a result, these will not be the criminal factions we explore in this video, though we do know that these groups need to get a little more original with their names. What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Michael and welcome to FudgeMuppet. Today I've got a really neat Elder Scrolls lore video for you covering 4 criminal factions or groups that you may not really know anything about. And fear not, for these criminal factions won't include the obvious ones like the Thieves Guild and the Dark Brotherhood, and they will be far more in-depth than the ones I listed at the beginning of the video. I wanted to explore some of the more obscure but well thought out factions that some people wouldn't have heard of or perhaps simply forgot about. As a result, a lot of these criminal groups will be minor factions, and many will provide some very nostalgic memories of certain quests over a number of Elder Scrolls games, but I'm hoping there's some in here that you actually didn't know existed at all. Some of you Elder Scrolls veterans might actually know everything about all of them, but if you do learn something new, be sure to give this video a like. It helps a ton and we really appreciate the support. We're also defining criminal factions as groups that have continually committed highly illegal acts to achieve their goals. With that all said, let's dive into the underworld of the Elder Scrolls with the first criminal faction on this list, the Ren Redrew Pirates. I mentioned these crazy cats in a recent video we made on Countess Alicia Caro and her very dark secret. The Ren Redrew Pirates are a Khajiit criminal organization who have acted as mercenaries and as terrorists. Ren Redrew Pirates literally translates to the mercenary's grin or the smiling scum. This was originally a derogatory term, but these amused Khajiit decided to adopt it and give it a whole new meaning. You may also know this group as the Ren Redrew Maua, although this is technically the naval subgroup of this criminal faction, also named the Ren Redrew Pirates. During the Alliance War in the Second Era, the Ren Redrew Maua were hired by the Aldmeri Dominion to be privateers. They raided the coasts of Glenumbra, which is on the western peninsula of High Rock. Also around this time, they began to operate along the western coasts of Blackmarsh and Morrowind. At times, they tried to enslave populations of Argonians, and they also aided the Dominion invasion of Shadowfen, which is a northwest region of Blackmarsh. They ended up changing their allegiance after their leader was killed though, siding with the local pirate boss, Captain One-Eye. What an original name. Very interestingly, the criminal group also carried out terrorist attacks in County Leyawiin during the Third Era. Land here was given back to Cyrodiil after Elsewhere basically controlled it during part of the Second Era. The Ren Redrew Pirates were not happy about this, believing the land was theirs, and started to carry out attacks around the area, which ultimately didn't win them their land back, but it did give the Khajiits in Leyawiin a very bad name. The illegal group places their values on bravery, the justice of their Khajiit brothers and sisters, and the enjoyment of life. They're certainly one of my favorite criminal groups in the Elder Scrolls universe. But now let's move on to criminal faction number 2. You may have heard of the Morag Tong assassins, but they're not on this list as they're a legally sanctioned organization of killers. But what about the Kimono Tong? Well, as you can tell by the language, the Kimono Tong are also a group from Morrowind, and this crime syndicate is quite hard to define. They're more like a mafia if anything, although being completely happy to steal and stealing often, they have similarities to the Thieves Guild too. That said, they have less of a moral code and do commit to other illegal activities to achieve their goal. You see, the thing that makes the Kimono Tong so unique is that they have a very active role in manipulating politics and are obviously very politically driven. The Kimono Tong absolutely hate outsiders. They want to remove any foreign presence on Vvardenfell, and most of their manipulation and tactics are designed to achieve this very goal. They would almost never work with foreigners, except for in rare or exceptional circumstances, although they do tolerate outlanders as slaves. How nice. During the time of Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, the Kimono Tong had infiltrated various factions to ensure their aims were achieved. For example, the Kimono Tong had a huge grip on House Slalu, controlling councillors in both Saran and Vivec. This is strategic for them, as House Slalu was one of the 5 traditional great houses of Morrowind who were the most imperial-minded. By controlling the councillors, House Slalu tended to make major decisions only with the approval of the Kimono Tong. They're very xenophobic and even made secret secret deals with House Dagoth, which is considered the lost 6th great house of the Chima, led by the highly powerful Dagoth. We also know that they weren't a fan of the Thieves Guild, especially considering that they were A, rivals, and B, not a Dunmer organization. It is highly suggested that the Kimono Tong even controlled the Fighters Guild leader in Morrowind, known as Shoring Hardheart. The Fighters Guild will cause trouble for the Thieves Guild if you do their missions, and if you do the Thieves Guild missions, you have to take out Hardheart to remove the Kimono Tong presence from the faction. While this crime syndicate existed on Vardenfell during the time of Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, we know that their influence has reached much further. For example, during the Oblivion crisis of Elder Scrolls 4, the Kimono Tong had a presence in Cyrodiil, running an illegal skooma trade operation in the city of Cheydinhal. And speaking of illegal operations going down in secrecy in Cyrodiilic cities, I'd like to introduce the next criminal faction on the list, the Blackwood Company. These guys are rivals of the Fighters Guild in Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, and while you might have not originally thought of them to be a criminal organization, let me remind you why they absolutely are. Originating from the Blackwood Forest and also from the swamps of Blackmarsh, the Blackwood Company quickly rose to prominence in the Third Era as a mercenary group, kind of like the Fighters Guild. However, unlike the Fighters Guild, which had various rules and regulations regarding who can join, what jobs will be taken, and how much should be paid, the Blackwood Company was incredibly unregulated. They had no moral code, they would let anyone join, even criminals with a bounty on their head, and they would take any job, oftentimes even for low prices. This caused the Fighters Guild a great deal of trouble when the Blackwood Company set up in Leyawiin, as they started losing all their jobs to them during the Oblivion crisis. That said, the Empire was far too busy dealing with this crisis to deal with the criminal activity of the Blackwood Company, and they weren't officially a criminal organization anyway. It was more of a undercover thing, although to most citizens and officials, they pretty much knew dodgy activity was going down. So what makes the Blackwood Company, almost entirely comprised of Argonians and Khajiit, a criminal organization? Well, let's find out. Firstly, they will take any job regardless of moral concerns. This basically means that the Blackwood Company often does jobs for criminals or kills people without asking questions. For example, the Blackwood Company would guard a skooma kingpin or wipe out a small settlement of innocent citizens for the right price. This actually happened in Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. They committed indiscriminate killings and murdered members of both the Fighters Guild and random citizens. For example, you wipe out the entire town of Water's Edge for the Blackwood Company while infiltrating their ranks, although you don't know that you're killing civilians because you're hallucinating and thought they were goblins. But why are you hallucinating? Well, that brings me to the next criminal act of the Blackwood Company: ritual drug abuse and the smuggling of a hist tree from Blackmarsh into Cyrodiil. Hist sap is said to give the Argonian members a boost, making them fearless in combat and much stronger. Hist sap is considered an illegal drug, like skooma, because it has very negative effects on those who drink it, although it's only meant to benefit Argonians. However, the hist tree that was illegally smuggled was considered corrupted or sick, meaning that even Argonians would be driven into a murderous frenzy after consuming its sap. Really, this was just Bethesda rationalizing why you had the same experience if you chose to play as an Argonian, but it's canon nonetheless. In a nutshell, this mercenary group who will take all contracts offered, who will act recklessly and murderously in their tactics, who will smuggle drugs, and who accept criminals into their ranks are one hell of a criminal organization. Luckily, the hero of Kvatch put a stop to them. And now let's move on to the fourth criminal faction on our list. This one is a fascinating one, known as the Bau Malagma. The Bau Malagma were a faction of thieves that existed during the Second Era, and they were loved by large amounts of the Dunmer people, as they stole from the unjust and gave to the needy. It's a very Robin Hood ideology, and as you can imagine, they certainly would have been hated by a few citizens due to the fact that deciding who is unjust could often become quite subjective. The Bau Malagma, however, disappeared around the beginning of the Third Era. Without the Bau Malagma, the Kimono Tong would then be considered the next favorite criminal thief-related faction in Morrowind, and being extremely nationalistic and hateful towards outside groups, the Kimono Tong obviously weren't a fan of the Thieves Guild, which was viewed as a more imperial faction. In Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, the guildmaster of the Thieves Guild, known as Gentleman Jim Stacy, decided to bring back the Bau Malagma, or at least give the public the impression that they had returned. Technically speaking, this wouldn't be the case, as the true faction disappeared many years beforehand, and this new group would just be a sub-faction of the Thieves Guild. Anyways, Gentleman Jim Stacy enlisted the help of the Nerevarine to wear the gloves of the Bau Malagma and to undergo a series of quests wearing them, them. These protective gloves are significant as they were involved in a Baal Malagma custom of carrying burning fiery stones from the Red Mountain. The quests you were asked to complete involved stealing from the unjust and giving to the disadvantaged, just like the original faction once did. These actions were carried out in the name of the Baal Malagma, not the Thieves Guild, and Jim Stacey very likely made this move to appeal to the local Dunmer on Vardenfell and to draw popularity to this new sub-faction which he had control of, a group that the Dunmer would love more than the Thieves Guild and hopefully even more than the Kimono Tong. And by the way, Baal Malagma means stone fire men in the Dark Elf language. And there you have it, folks, 4 criminal factions that you may know nothing about. I really hope you learned something new, and if you want more videos like this, please do subscribe. Thank you so much for watching the whole video, and if you're searching to get more FudgeMuppet in your life, our Twitch channel is linked in the description alongside our social media links. We're currently streaming Oblivion. My name is Michael, thanks again for watching this video, and I look forward to nerding out with you again very soon.